Have you seen an uptick in people contacting MARC to come and give them trainings?
Absolutely. We've really seen an increase, particularly with the passage of the new law, which required that faculty in Massachusetts are trained. So requests for faculty trainings really increased dramatically. Requests for student trainings, we've always been pretty busy. We generally book up for student trainings, I would say, by April of the year before. So we were booked in April of this year for this entire school year. We have a waiting list already for the 2012-2013 school year.
Wow.
So we're definitely in high demand. Our staff has grown exponentially since I've been there. I've been with the MARC program for 5 years, and when I started, there was 4 full-time staff members, including graduate students, and now we have 8. So 8 or 9. Trying to think. Yeah. So
you mentioned legislation. Yeah. What is it here that we have in Massachusetts in terms of bullying?
Well, we have a really great law that was passed. I believe it was May 6th, 2009. And essentially what this law says is that, well, there's a couple different components to it. So it defines bullying, and then it requires schools to have a policy in place. So how they're going to deal with it. Anytime bullying is reported, what are the steps you're going to take? How is it going to be investigated? And then it really doesn't lay out consequences or anything like that, but it just says that schools must respond, and they must have this published policy in place. Now, the way that this impacts faculty is faculty must be trained, and schools can kind of determine when they want to do that. Is it every 2 years? Is it when 15% of our staff turnover? How are we going to kind of define that? And then it's all school personnel. So this includes secretaries, workers in the cafeteria, janitors, bus drivers, anyone who comes into contact with students. And then also too, when bullying is reported, schools must notify someone at home. If it's thought to be illegal, schools must notify the police. So those are the pieces that are a little different. When I work with kids, I always say, this is how it affects you, is that, schools must notify someone now. Yeah. It used to be that schools could say, we're going to handle it here, we're going to, kind of figure it out on school prep, but now they have to notify people. So that's, it's 17 pages, I believe. So it's a lot of information in the legislation, but essentially those are the main components. There's a no name calling day that I believe is January. It's the last Wednesday in January every year that Governor Patrick has set out and set aside for that. So there's a lot of different pieces, but the main pieces is the published policy, the faculty training, and then programming must be in place for students. It must be implemented across the grades. There should be curriculum in place, and all of it has to be evidence-based, which is one of the things that sets the legislation in Massachusetts apart. A lot of other programs can be kind of just common sense programs. Right. Massachusetts, we require that you're using something that's evidence-based.
What does that mean?
That means that you have data to back up, that it's actually working. So, for instance, at the MARC program, we have a K through 5 curriculum, and we have a high school. And so what we do is we pilot these programs and we get feedback. So, we do feedback surveys and get information about, do you think this has made an impact? Has it actually shown a difference? And if you can't prove that, then it's not considered evidence-based. There must be data to back it up.
I think that's great.
So important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've been going from a common sense approach for a really long time, and it's not working. So we have to look at a different way of doing this.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things for us that we are really, really firm, is that we do research on all of it. We don't we don't just think, oh, well, maybe we should tell the kids this. Everything we do comes out of the research that we do.
Let's talk specifically about bullying and the signs of bullying.
Yep.
If a parent has a child in the Needham Public Schools or even in private school and suspects that their kid is being bullied, what are some of the signs that the child might be showing that he or she is in fact being bullied?
Well, what they usually are, and what you want to look, they're non-specific signs. So what it is, you're going to be looking for changes in behavior, especially focused during the school hours. Like all of a sudden, did your child always love school and now they don't want to be here? Are they worried about their getting on the bus in the morning? So changes in behavior in that way, changes in social habits. So if friendships change really quickly, if you see that all of a sudden they had a ton of friends, now looking pretty isolated, maybe they're not talking to the same people. And then, general changes in mood and behavior, so depression, problems eating and sleeping, things like this. And again, they're all non-specific signs.
Right, I was going to say, how can you tell if that is something related to bullying or something related to just going through puberty or just having a bad moment?
Typical adolescent behavior, right? What we always say is, these things, if you see these things happening, it's an indicator that you need to have a conversation. That's what it is. We always talk, the biggest tool that parents have is conversation, is asking the questions and just saying, you seem a little off. How is everything?
Right.
And it might take a little while, but keeping those conversations up and kind of really asking, I noticed that, oh, you don't talk to Mary anymore on the phone. Did something happen? So
that's actually a good suggestion for parents to keep on their kids, because there's a lot of times that I think that parents might start to talk to their kids and the kids don't want to deal with it, or quite frankly, they might not have a good relationship with their parents, so they're not used to talking to their parent in that way. So how do you encourage a parent, and then how do you encourage kids to really open up and say, okay, my mother or my father, both my parents are trying to help me now. How do you get them to get to that point where they can open up?
To really move forward. What we say to kids, and the message, I think for a lot of years, we sent this message, tell an adult, tell an adult. And what we've kind of been moving towards is talk to someone you trust. So I think even that message in itself says a lot about, you have to build up the trust. You have to build up the rapport, if you would. So really, kind of forming the relationship. And it's, for parents, it's not always a good idea to go in and start talking. Have you been bullied? Have you been cyberbullied? Maybe start the conversations in the abstract. How's school? How's your friends? What are classes like? And if you're online, what do you do? Where do you go? What sites do you visit?
Well, it's probably very important for the parent to know what sites they're on, and if they have a Facebook page, that they're friends with their child on Facebook, so that they can monitor what's happening.
And there's a lot of parents who aren't comfortable with that. So what I always say to parents, I'm pretty old school when it comes to technology. So I always tell parents, you can be old school. You don't have to be, but then if you're not going to be on Facebook, you want to enlist the help of the community, help of friends, family, because there are definitely people in your family and in your life that are on Facebook that can friend your children and keep an eye on them and things like that.
And aunt, a cousin,
exactly. There's going to be somebody who's Facebook obsessed.
Absolutely.
So,
like me. I'm Facebook obsessed.
So. Exactly. So they can all call you and you can keep an eye on them.
Exactly.
So there you go.
For a small fee. How
Yeah.
do you tell the difference between a child who is bullying and a child who maybe is just teasing? Because it's a fine line,
right?
But there is a difference.
Absolutely. The defining characteristics for bullying is that it is a repetitive act that is repeat over time and that is targeted and intentional. And it also involves some sort of power imbalance between the students. What we find most often, I think, as adults, we think traditionally of like size. I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm older. That's not really what we see in schools today. What we really see is something that's a little different. Popularity and social status tends to be that kind of power difference that we see among students.
Right.
So, really being very aware that there's a distinction between fighting, between teasing, between bullying, and knowing that those three components must be there for something to be called bullying.
Right.
I think defining it is so important. It's the first thing we do in any presentation, whether it's kindergartners or 12th graders or parents, or it's, what is the difference?
Right, and I think that's important too, is that bullying can happen at any age, any stage in life, because certainly even in your adult life, you might run into people who bully you.
Yeah,
and it's just a matter of how you deal with them. So what are the tips that you give to kids on how to deal with bullies?
Well, we talk a lot about, because really it's a very complex kind of social structure, so our program is more of a preventative program in nature. So we don't do a lot of counseling and treatment with victims and bullies per se, but what we do is we try to work towards creating a climate where kids feel comfortable to stand up and say, I'm not going to stand around and watch this, or I'm not going to laugh along with a joke. I'm not going to spread the rumors. I'm not going to get involved in the gossip. So it's really telling kids, it's okay to say, no, I'm not going to be part of that.
Right. On the other hand, it's very easy for kids to get involved in that group think and go along with what everybody else is saying.
Yep.
And it does take a strong child to basically say, this is wrong, what
Yep.
you're saying is wrong, what you're doing is
Yep.
wrong, and I'm not going to be part of it.
Absolutely. And what we do is what I always try to do for kids. I'm kind of a loudmouth. So I'm one of those people that could, walk up and say, I don't like what you're doing.
Right.
But I always say to kids, we're all different. We all have to think about what works for us. Maybe
Right.
you're a person who's just going to walk away.
Right.
And that's okay. As long as you're not standing around and supporting the people who are bullying and harassing and things like that. So.
Yeah, I remember one time when I think I was in 5th grade, and there was a girl who was teasing a friend of mine.
Yep.
And I did say to her, and it was just me and her one-on-one in the hallway.
Yep.
And I said to her, I'm like, you wouldn't like it if somebody made fun of you for the way you look.
Yeah.
And she kind of looked at me like, huh.
Yeah.
Like she hadn't thought of that. So a lot of times it might just be calling the bully out
Yeah.
and saying, look, you're different from me.
We're all different.
Right.
Yep.
And it's, you wouldn't want somebody treating you this way, so why are you treating this other person that way? And sometimes I think it has a lot to do with their home life too. There could be things going on at their home that causes them to then go into school and take out their anger or angst on
Absolutely.
somebody else.
Yep.
What are the differences between bullying in person and cyberbullying?
Really, the kind of dichotomy that we've created, like bullying and cyberbullying, is really kind of false. What we've seen in our research is that they're very interrelated. If you see bullying in person, you're probably going to be seeing it online, particularly once they hit the middle and high school ages. Really, the only difference is the dynamic. The dynamic changes online. The power structure changes. So what you might see is kids who are not so powerful in school maybe are a little more powerful online. So it's really just the dynamic. The behaviors themselves are very similar. But I think with cyberbullying, the same thing is happening, that we're overusing the term. Everything is called cyberbullying. Everything. It's even worse than bullying.
Right.
And so it's important, again, to make that distinction. So there are things that are bullying, and there are things that are cyberbullying, and then there's other stuff.
Right.
There's fights, there's conflict.
Right.
So.
And how do you deal if, let's say I'm a parent and my daughter I think she's being bullied, but in fact, it's just a little disagreement she's having with a few of her friends.
Yep.
How do I not get too, I don't want to say enraged, but how do I not get too worked up? And what are the steps you take to decipher whether or not it's just, okay, they're just having a spat, or this is something I need to take seriously?
Yep. I think, again, the conversations are going to help you. So is it a one-time thing? They just got into a fight and it's maybe not such a big deal? Or do you know that it's been happening for a while? Is your child being targeted versus, there's 5 or 6 girls or boys targeting your child? These might be indicators. But I do think what you said too is so important, that it's really important as parents that we don't show our children how upset we are. It's hard to do. I remember going to my mom when I was in 6th grade, and she would tell me, and I could see her getting upset, and I can't believe these girls are doing this to you, and and what the message that sends to the children is that they don't want to upset us.
Right.
They don't want to see that. So I know it's difficult, but one of the tips that we say to parents is really try not to let your child see how upset you are. If you need to sit there and you're, holding back and you just have the conversation and then go behind a closed door and scream into a pillow if you have to, but just not allow them to see that as much. And especially not getting enraged and kind of fighting back with the bully's family or confronting. Again, you want to act as a role model.
Right. And you actually see that though sometimes, where a parent will then, okay, your kid's going to be on my kid, well, I'm going to be on you. And that's obviously not the right way to respond.
No, absolutely. It's the 2 wrongs don't make a right, So if you're modeling those behaviors for your children, that's what they're going to see. And they're going to think this is the way you handle these problems. And what you want them to think about are the more proactive ways, the more productive ways of, maybe it's for some kids, there's all sorts of strategies, I think, and it's important to remember that all of our children are different. And I think it's important to ask them, what do you think would work? If someone came to you, what would you want, if you went to one of your friends, what would you want them to say to you if you were upset? And teach them how to be a good friend, teach them how to support their friends, because the developmental kind of tendency is for kids to want to talk to other kids.
Right.
So help your child be a good support system. I think that's a really important thing too. So
do you find that can work too? Is that if you're sitting down with a child and saying, how would you respond to this? And then they can take it, let's say they're being bullied, can they then take that and execute what they're talking about and see a change in the other kids?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, and again, I think kids are very good at translating that and saying, okay, because if you ask them, it's an idea that they come up with. And again, this goes back to why we have students decide what programming they want to implement at schools, because when they're invested, when it's their idea, they're much more likely to be able to accomplish something with it. And I think the other thing too is to always remember with kids that they are going to try things. Some things are going to work. Some things aren't going to work. And we have to help them define success too.
Right.
Does successful interactions, does that mean that there's no bullying at all? Or does it mean that maybe if you came and reported and talked to mom or dad or talked to your brother or sister, did it maybe just make you feel better? So we have to help them define that.
Right.
If they want that instant quick answer, then maybe we have to help them think, well, maybe that's not going to happen, but maybe I'll just feel a little bit better.
Right,
Maybe, so we have to help them look at it that way too.